It started on a quiet Tuesday morning. A woman came home to find her husband lying motionless on their bedroom floor. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry, just silence and death. The man was Luther Blackwell, 36 years old, a successful real estate agent, by all accounts healthy, happy, and thriving. But within minutes of being found, he was pronounced dead at the scene. His wife, Shanice, was inconsolable. Just 3 weeks earlier, her world had been shattered by a discovery no one should ever have to face. Her husband had been having an affair, not with a coworker or a stranger, but with her own mother. That betrayal tore through their family like wildfire. And now, Luther was gone. At first, his death seemed like a tragedy. But what the investigation would uncover was a tangled web of lies, obsession, and betrayal that no one could have imagined. Shanice Wallace Blackwell was the kind of woman who seemed to have everything together. 32 years old, a registered pediatric nurse. She was known for her warmth, compassion, and calm under pressure, the kind of person who could soothe a crying child and steady the nerves of anxious parents in a heartbeat. She worked long shifts at the county children's hospital, but never once let the stress of the job touch her marriage, or so she thought. Shanice believed in loyalty, in commitment. She came from a home where family meant everything, especially after her father passed when she was still in high school. That loss drew her even closer to her mother, Martha Wallace, who had raised her single-handedly after the funeral. Shanice often said her mother was her best friend, the person she could count on above anyone else. Martha was 55 and a respected figure in the community. She worked as a church secretary and part-time event planner for local fundraisers and weddings. Polished, put together, and deeply involved in her church, Martha was admired for her elegance and discipline. She was the kind of woman who hosted dinner parties with linen napkins, sang alto in the church choir, and always wore perfume that lingered long after she left her room. But behind her carefully maintained composure, Martha was a woman who hated aging. Her divorce 10 years earlier had bruised her ego and left her quietly craving attention, especially from younger men. That part of her she kept buried, behind polite smiles and scripture. No one, not even her daughter, saw the deep envy she carried. Envy of youth, of intimacy, of the life her daughter was building. Luther Blackwell entered the picture 3 years before the tragedy. Tall, charming, and sharply dressed, he was a 36-year-old real estate broker who knew how to work a room. Clients loved him. He had a magnetic presence and a confident way of speaking that made people feel they were in good hands. To Martha, he was the embodiment of everything she missed. Energy, ambition, a sense of command. To Shanice, he was a protector, a provider, a partner. The two met at a hospital charity gala, and the connection was instant. Within a year, they were engaged. Luther seemed genuinely devoted. He brought Martha flowers on holidays, called her mom, and went out his way to include her in family plans. Martha beamed with pride. She was finally watching her daughter live the life she herself had once hoped for, but a seed of resentment had already been planted. By the time Luther and Shanice married, Martha was more than just a mother-in-law. She was ever present. She helped plan the honeymoon, offered to redecorate their first home, and stopped by unannounced with groceries or baked goods. At first, Shanice welcomed the help, but over time, it started to feel intrusive. Still, nothing seemed seriously wrong. To outsiders, the Blackwells looked like a tight-knit modern family. There were Instagram photos of brunches, birthday parties, holiday dinners. Laughter filled their home. Martha would sometimes stay over when Shanice was working night shifts at the hospital. She said it was to help Luther feel less alone in the big house. No one imagined that those nights might have led to something else. In private, things weren't as perfect as they appeared. Luther had grown distant. He spent more time at work and less time connecting with Shanice. He claimed stress, long hours, and market pressure were the reasons for his detachment. She believed him at first, but deep down, she knew something had shifted. The warmth in their marriage was cooling. The easy laughter between them had grown tense, awkward. Something, or someone, had changed him. Martha, on the other hand, seemed lighter than ever. Her mood was buoyant. She dressed more boldly, wore lipstick more often, and found excuses to be near Luther. When Shanice asked about it, she dismissed it with a smile. "I'm just taking better care of myself," she said. "Don't you think I deserve to feel good about myself again?" It wasn't until a friend of Shanice, a co-worker at the hospital, made an offhand comment that things began to unravel. "I saw your mom and Luther the other day," she said. "They looked cozy." At first, Shanice laughed it off, but the seed had been planted. And soon, she couldn't help but notice the strange tension between her husband and her mother. The long looks, the silence when she entered the room, the subtle shift in tone whenever Luther said Martha's name. Still, she didn't want to believe it. How could she? This was her mother, the woman who raised her, the person she trusted more than anyone. And Luther, the man she married, the man who had promised her forever. To think they might be hiding something together felt impossible. But as she would soon learn, the truth doesn't care how impossible it seems. And once it came to light, nothing would ever be the same again. It didn't start as a full-blown affair. Like most betrayals, it began quietly, with stolen glances, innocent conversations, and just enough emotional overlap to feel harmless at first. Luther Blackwell never planned to fall into an affair with his wife's mother. Even he would later admit, in the final weeks of his life, that it began as nothing more than flattery. Martha Wallace had a way of making him feel seen, in a way Shanice hadn't in months. Shanice, with her long shifts and deep sense of responsibility, had unintentionally become emotionally distant. She was exhausted, often distracted, and increasingly preoccupied with the idea of starting a family, something Luther wasn't entirely ready for. He felt cornered, like the life they were building was being scripted for him, and he had lost his voice in the process. Martha, however, gave him attention without expectation. It started with simple things. Casual chats over wine while Shanice was working late, shared jokes about reality shows, long conversations about career frustrations. Martha listened intently. She complimented him freely, smiled a little longer than she should have, and didn't hide how impressed she was by his ambition. At first, Luther chalked it up to motherly pride. But over time, the compliments turned into touches. A hand brushing his shoulder, a lingering hug at the door. And once, after too much wine on a warm Friday night, she kissed him. He didn't pull away. That kiss didn't ignite a fiery romance. It created confusion, guilt, and yet a dangerous thrill neither of them could shake. What followed was weeks of silence, then more stolen moments, texts, emotional confessions. Boundaries blurred quickly, and what started as an accident soon evolved into a full-blown affair. Luther knew it was wrong. So did Martha. But they justified it in different ways. Luther saw it as temporary. A strange, secret world he could compartmentalize. A place where he could feel powerful again, desired, unjudged. He told himself he still loved Shanice, that this didn't have to mean anything deeper. He believed he had control. Martha's feelings were different. For her, the affair wasn't just about lust. It was about fantasy. It was about rewriting the past, about winning something back. She had been abandoned once by her husband, overlooked by men for years, and slowly faded into invisibility. But Luther chose her, and that meant everything. She began to confuse affection with destiny. When they were together, she saw herself not as a mother-in-law, but as a woman who was finally being loved, deeply, passionately, and without apology. And slowly, dangerously, she began to believe this secret relationship was real, that maybe, just maybe, it could exist beyond the shadows. But of course it couldn't. Shanice began noticing changes. Luther's phone habits shifted, more guarded, more text deleted. He began avoiding family dinners, making excuses not to attend church events where Martha would be present. But even in his distance, there were inconsistencies. One afternoon, she borrowed his laptop to send a resume. What she found shocked her. A string of deleted emails, half-erased drafts, messages sent late at night to someone labeled only as M. Phrases like, "I can't keep sneaking around," and "last night shouldn't have happened," jumped off the screen. Her chest tightened as she scrolled. And then the photo. It wasn't explicit. Just a picture of Martha, taken from across a candlelit table, holding a glass of red wine, eyes glowing. Everything stopped. Shanice didn't confront him immediately. She was numb, sick with disbelief. 4 days. She replayed every interaction between her mother and her husband. The late-night visits. The helpful drop-ins. The weird energy that once seemed like paranoia now felt like evidence. When she finally did confront Luther, he crumbled. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. He tried to explain. Said it was a mistake. Said he didn't know how it had gotten that far. That he had ended it. That it meant nothing. But to Shanice, it meant everything. She threw him out that night. The betrayal cut deeper than infidelity. It destroyed her sense of self, her trust in family, her belief that love could be safe. And worst of all, her own mother refused to apologize. It took 3 days for Shanice to find the strength to confront them. 3 days of pretending, of going to work, washing dishes, answering texts, all while a storm brewed just beneath her skin. Her world had split in two, the life she had lived and the unbearable truth she now carried. She could barely look Luther in the eyes. And Martha? She didn't even return her calls. But on the third day, a Sunday, she invited them both to dinner. She cooked her mother's favorite, lemon herb chicken with garlic mashed potatoes, and Luther's too, roasted asparagus and pecan pie for dessert. She set the table like it was Thanksgiving, lit candles, played soft jazz on the Bluetooth speaker. It was the kind of scene she used to treasure. A quiet night, just the three of them. Only this time, it wasn't love that filled the air. It was a trap. They arrived separately. Martha walked in first, wearing a blue silk blouse and pearl earrings, greeting Shanice with a kiss on the cheek and a, "You didn't have to go all out, baby." Then came Luther, 15 minutes late, smiling sheepishly, blaming traffic. He kissed her too, on the forehead, quickly, then poured himself a glass of wine. Dinner was awkward at first. The conversation stayed shallow. Martha talked about a new family at church. Luther complained about interest rates and demanding clients. Shanice just listened, her face a mask, her voice measured. But beneath the table, her hands were clenched into fists. Halfway through dessert, she set her fork down. "I know," she said simply. They both looked up. Luther's brow furrowed. Martha tilted her head. "No, what, sweetheart?" Shanice looked straight at her mother. "About the two of you." "I know." Silence. Luther's fork slipped from his hand and clattered onto the plate. Martha blinked once, then twice. "Shanice," she began, "I don't know what you think you saw." "I saw the text," she cut in. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every syllable hit like a hammer. "On his phone. Last night was incredible. She has no idea. Do you want me to keep going?" Luther opened his mouth, then closed it again. His face had gone pale. Martha pressed her lips together, eyes flickering with something between shame and defiance. Shanice stood. "I gave you both everything. My love, my trust, my loyalty, and this is how you repay me." "Shanice, it didn't mean to happen like this," Luther said quietly. "Then how did it mean to happen?" Her voice cracked now. "Was it the plan all along? Wait until I was busy saving lives, so you could sneak around with my mother?" Martha stood too, reaching for her. "Baby, please. We never wanted to hurt you." Shanice recoiled. "Don't call me that." The tears came suddenly, hot and bitter. "You were supposed to be the one person I could always trust," she whispered to her mother. "You raised me to believe in love, in family, and you threw all of it away. For what? For some pathetic midlife fantasy?" Martha's face hardened, just slightly. "You don't understand what it's like to be alone for as long as I have, to be invisible. Do you have any idea what that does to a woman?" "No," Shanice snapped, "because I didn't sleep with your husband to feel better about myself." Luther stepped between them. "Please, this isn't helping anyone." Shanice's eyes burned holes through him. "You should leave." "Shanice." "Now." He hesitated, then turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him. Martha stood frozen, unsure whether to follow. "I said both of you," Shanice added. Martha hesitated for a long moment, then turned, gathered her things, and walked out without another word. When the door closed again, the silence was deafening. That night, Shanice sat on the floor of the bedroom, surrounded by photos, her wedding album, old family pictures, birthday cards. One by one, she tore them in half. It wasn't rage. It was mourning. The betrayal had broken something in her. Not just her marriage, not just her faith in her mother, but something deeper, her belief in safety, in belonging, in home. Word spread fast. Within weeks, their entire social circle knew. The scandal was too big, too twisted, to keep quiet. Martha quietly resigned from the church. Luther's real estate business took a hit. Clients dropped him. He was rarely seen in public after that. It was 3 weeks after confrontation when Luther Blackwell was found dead. The morning began like any other. Shanice had just returned from a night shift at the hospital. Exhausted, emotionally hollow, but trying her best to move forward. She pulled into the driveway of what had once been their dream home to pick up a few final belongings. The divorce was moving forward quickly now, clean and cold. She didn't expect him to be there. The blinds were still drawn. No movement in the windows. At first, She assumed he had already gone to work. But when she unlocked the door and stepped inside, something felt off. The air was still, heavy. A faint smell lingered, like wine and something metallic. She called his name once. No answer. The bedroom door was ajar. And there he was, lying face down on the floor beside the bed, motionless. No blood, no sign of injury, just stillness. A bottle of bourbon toppled near his hand. 2 prescription bottles, empty on the nightstand. His phone blinking on the carpet with unread messages. Shanice dropped to her knees, her nurse's instincts kicking in despite the rising panic. She checked for a pulse, for breath, for anything, but it was already too late. Luther Blackwell was gone. He was 36. The coroner's report later confirmed it. An overdose. A fatal cocktail of alcohol and benzodiazepines, mixed with antidepressants. The toxicology report read like a quiet scream. Not an accident, not quite a suicide note, but a clear message nonetheless. The fallout was immediate. Detectives arrived within the hour. The house was sealed. Shanice, though technically divorced in process, was still next of kin. She was questioned, though not as a suspect, at least not at first. Her grief was real, but so was the history. And the scandal. The questions came quickly. When did you last speak? Did he seem depressed? Did he ever mention harming himself? Yes, he had. In the days after she confronted him, Luther had tried to reach out. Dozens of missed calls. Late-night texts. "I messed up. Please talk to me. I don't know what to do without you." But Shanice never responded. She had nothing left to say. When they found his final message, unsent and half-typed on his phone, it gutted her. "I wish I could take it back. All of it. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I never stopped loving her." But it was too late. The funeral was small, quiet, no headlines, no eulogies from friends. A man undone by his own choices, mourned by few. Shanice didn't speak. She sat in the back, alone, dressed in black, sunglasses shielding her swollen eyes. She didn't cry in front of anyone, but when they lowered the casket, her body shook with silent grief. Martha did attend, though she kept her distance. No one spoke to her. She wore a dark veil, but it didn't hide the judgment in people's eyes. She looked older than ever, deflated, alone. The affair had already cost her everything, her church, her daughter, her reputation. And now, it had claimed the man she had risked it all for. After the service, Shanice stood at the edge of the cemetery for a long time. She wasn't sure what she felt. Anger, sadness, relief, regret. They all blurred together in the spring wind. "I hope you found peace," she whispered. Then she walked away, not just from the grave, but from the weight of it all. She didn't go home. She didn't return Martha's calls. She drove until the city blurred behind her, until the noise faded, until she could finally breathe. Because Luther's death wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was a final nail in a truth too painful to live with. And for Shanice, that death was a beginning too. Of rebuilding, of reckoning, of learning how to live again without trusting the people she once loved most. Luther Blackwell's death was officially ruled an overdose. But not everyone was convinced. Detective Alana Prescott had been with the department for over 15 years. Long enough to know that sometimes the most peaceful-looking deaths hide the darkest truths. Something about the scene at the Blackwell home didn't sit right with her. The timeline was too clean. The bottles too neatly arranged. The lack of a suicide note, aside from that half-typed message, left questions unanswered. And then there was the scandal, when word quietly surfaced that Luther had been involved in an affair with his mother-in-law, and that Shanice had discovered it just weeks before his death. The case shifted. What began as a simple overdose morphed into something far more complicated. Detectives began combing through phone records, text messages, financial transactions, and digital logs. What they found only deepened the mystery. The text messages between Martha and Luther didn't end after the affair was exposed. They intensified. Just days before his death, Martha had sent messages that sounded desperate, pleading, even angry. "You said, you handle this. She can't find out everything. Don't make me regret trusting you." There were also large withdrawals from Luther's personal accounts, nearly $15,000 over the course of a month, cash that couldn't be accounted for in his estate or belongings. And in the days before his death, Luther had scheduled meetings with a lawyer. According to receptionist notes, he was planning to revise his will and cut someone out. Then came the toxicology detail. Traces of lorazepam in his system, a medication not prescribed to him. The pill bottles found at the scene were in Martha Wallace's name. That discovery opened the door. Investigators executed a search warrant on Martha's home. They found shredded notes in her trash can. Pieced back together, they revealed scribbled lines. He's going to tell her everything. I gave him what he wanted. He owes me. It was supposed to be just us. There was also a journal, half-written entries full of rage, regret, and obsession. In one entry dated just 4 days before Luther's death, she wrote, "He says he loves her again, that he's going back to her. After everything I did, after everything we shared, I won't be thrown away like some dirty secret." That was enough for a warrant. Martha Wallace was arrested on suspicion of second-degree murder, with the prosecution arguing that she had deliberately supplied the drugs that killed Luther or possibly administered them herself during one of their final meetings. While there was no surveillance footage placing her at the house the night before, phone triangulation placed her less than 2 blocks from his home for over an hour the evening prior to his death. The case gripped the local community. The elegant church secretary, the respected mother, now standing trial for the murder of her daughter's husband and former lover. Headlines screamed betrayal. Talk shows speculated motives. Neighbors, once reverent, now whispered every time she walked by in an orange jumpsuit and shackles. But no one was more affected than Shanice. When detectives informed her of the arrest, she felt numb. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She simply sat in silence, staring out the window of the precinct. Her entire life, her marriage, her relationship with her mother, her belief in family, had collapsed under the weight of secrets she never asked for. Now, she was both the grieving widow and the daughter of the accused. In court, Martha maintained her innocence. She claimed the texts were taken out of context, that the drugs were for her own use, that Luther had stolen them during one of their meetings, desperate, unraveling, suicidal. But the evidence kept stacking. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman scorned, a woman who had tasted forbidden love and couldn't bear to lose it, a woman who, when cornered by the consequences of her choices, chose to erase the man who could expose her shame. The trial was set, and for Shanice, the nightmare wasn't over. It was just entering a new, excruciating phase. Because now, she would have to sit in the front row of a courtroom and watch as the woman who gave her life was accused of taking someone else's. The trial lasted 6 weeks. In the end, the jury deliberated for only 6 hours before reaching a verdict: guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The prosecution hadn't been able to prove premeditation beyond a reasonable doubt. There was no concrete evidence Martha had directly administered the drugs, but they argued successfully that her actions had led to Luther's death. She had knowingly provided a powerful sedative to a man she knew was emotionally unstable, and she had done so under a cloud of manipulation, jealousy, and deceit. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 5. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read. Martha showed no emotion, just a long, hollow stare ahead. Shanice, sitting quietly in the back row, felt her world fracture once again, not from the sentence, but from the finality of it all. Her mother, her best friend, her confidant, was now a convicted felon. Luther was dead, and she was left in the wreckage. After the sentencing, the house felt like a tomb. The wedding photos on the wall, once symbols of joy, now looked like cruel reminders. The scent of Martha's perfume still lingered on a throw pillow she'd once gifted. Shanice couldn't bring herself to throw it out. Not yet. She took a leave of absence from the hospital. Every patient's cry reminded her of the family she had dreamed of having, and now never would, at least not with Luther. Friends reached out, but she rarely responded. She couldn't explain what she was feeling, because even she didn't understand it. There was grief, yes, but also humiliation, rage, and an aching loneliness that clung to her like fog. At one point, she packed a suitcase and drove 6 hours north, booking a small cabin by the lake. For 2 weeks, she didn't speak to a soul. She just sat on the porch with a blanket, her journal, and silence. She wrote not about the affair or the betrayal, but about who she used to be before it all fell apart. The woman who believed in love, in safety, in family. Slowly, something shifted. She began to feel again, not just the pain, but something beneath it, a flicker of resilience. By the time she returned home, she had made a quiet decision. She would not let this story define her. Shanice sold the house. She donated most of Luther's belongings, keeping only a small wooden box of photos and letters, reminders of the man he was before it all went wrong. She started therapy, returned to work, and in time, found herself smiling again, not because everything was okay, but because she had survived. Martha wrote to her from prison twice. The first letter was an apology. The second was a plea for understanding. Shanice read them both, but never replied. Some wounds don't heal with words. Others aren't meant to heal at all, just carried, reshaped into something quieter. Years later, when asked about what happened, Shanice rarely told the whole story. She'd say her husband passed unexpectedly, that her mother was serving time, and leave it at that. The rest, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the night spent screaming into her pillow, stayed locked inside. But she never stopped writing. In time, her journal became a manuscript, and eventually a book, not about Luther or Martha by name, but about betrayal, grief, and the strength it takes to rebuild after the unthinkable. It became a bestseller, because deep down, people recognize the truth within it, that the worst pain doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it comes from the ones we love the most. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a love triangle, or even a story about betrayal. It was a story about trust and how fragile it can be, about the roles we play in each other's lives, mother, wife, husband, and how easily those roles can be twisted when desire and resentment creep in. It was about the lies we tell ourselves to keep the peace, the things we choose not to see, because seeing them would mean accepting that the people we love the most are capable of the deepest harm. Luther Blackwell didn't have to die, but he did because boundaries were broken, because secrets were kept, because ego, loneliness, and emotional hunger collided in the most destructive way. And in the aftermath, the lesson was clear. Sometimes love is enough. Sometimes the people closest to us carry the sharpest knives. And the deepest wounds aren't physical, they're emotional, psychological, invisible. But even after betrayal, even after loss, there can still be something left to salvage. Yourself. Because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means surviving and choosing to rebuild, even when the foundation has crumbled.